Hello and welcome to Random Topics with Jack, the podcast where we explore the intriguing and sometimes controversial topics that shape our understanding of the world. Last time, we followed air through the respiratory cycle. This time, we're following several million people through the morning rush hour, which is roughly the same thing, except lungs are usually better at coordinating their connections. Picture the start of an ordinary journey. You leave home, walk to a stop, wait for a bus, change onto a train, and walk the final stretch to wherever you're going. The bus and the train are the visible parts. Behind them sits a much larger system. Timetables, tracks, roads, power supplies, stations, fares, maintenance crews, traffic signals, and thousands of small decisions about where a service goes and how often it turns up. A train can travel at more than 100 miles an hour and still be completely useless if the station is too far away, the last connection has already left, or you cannot get onto the platform. That is the central idea for today. Mass transit is not really a collection of big vehicles. It's a network designed to move large numbers of people reliably through limited space. We're going to look at what counts as mass transit, why frequency matters so much, how it reshapes cities, what buses and rail are each good at, and why the network does not stop at the station door. That brings us to pedestrianised areas, low emission zones, congestion charging, and the rather large engineering question of how to electrify the whole thing. So please stand clear of the closing doors, or if you're listening on a bus, please move down the inside of the vehicle. Public transport and mass transit are often used as though they mean exactly the same thing. For everyday conversation, that's usually fine, but public transport describes a service available to the public, while mass transit puts the emphasis on scale. It's about moving a lot of people along corridors where lots of people want to travel. That can mean a metro train beneath a city centre, it can mean a tram running down a main road, it can mean a suburban railway bringing people in from surrounding towns, or a stream of buses using their own lanes. The word mass can make us focus on the size of the vehicle, but a double-decker bus sitting empty in traffic is not demonstrating particularly impressive mass transit. A useful measure is not simply how many seats one vehicle contains, it's how many people the whole service can move through a place over time. So, one train every half hour may have plenty of seats, but a slightly smaller train every 5 minutes can provide more capacity and much more freedom. There are 5 ideas worth keeping in mind as we travel through this episode: capacity, frequency, reliability, connection, and access. Capacity is how many people the system can carry. Frequency is how often the service arrives. Reliability is whether it arrives when people have been told it will. Connection is whether the individual routes work together, and access is whether the people can actually reach, afford, and use the service. If one of those collapses, the shiny vehicle in the brochure cannot rescue the network on its own. So imagine 2 bus routes crossing in the centre of town. If each bus comes once an hour, that crossing is technically a connection. In practice, it may be a 45-minute opportunity to study the architecture of a bus shelter. If both come every few minutes, the same crossing becomes useful without passengers planning their lives around a timetable. That's why frequency is sometimes described as freedom. High frequency reduces the cost of missing a service. Reliability makes it possible to trust the connection. A simple fare system means you're not punished for changing vehicle. Clear information means you know where to go next. Each improvement makes the others more valuable. A new line does not only help people living beside that line, it can create new journeys across every other route it connects to. The opposite is also true. A delayed train can make someone miss a bus. A missed bus can make them late for work. And if that happens often enough, the timetable stops being a promise and becomes more of a creative writing exercise. Separation from traffic is one way of protecting that promise. Railways do this with tracks. Metros usually go further by separating themselves from road traffic and often other trains. Buses can get some of the same advantage through dedicated lanes and priority at junctions. But the connections are not only between vehicles. They include pavement to the stop, the crossing to the outside of the station, the lift to the platform, and the distance between one service and the next. They include audible announcements, legible signs, and enough time for a person with limited mobility to change trains. The network begins at the front door and ends at the destination. Everything in between counts. The need to move large numbers of people is older than the motor car. By the middle of the 19th century, London was expanding rapidly. Mainline railways brought passengers to terminals around the centre, but they did not solve the final part of the journey through crowded streets. The solution was a railway underneath them. The Metropolitan Railway opened in 1863, connecting stations including Paddington, Euston, King's Cross, and Farringdon. It was the world's first underground passenger railway, and it was also operated by steam locomotives, underground. So while the Victorians had created the future of urban transport, the future apparently invited with it smoke, soot, and the firm belief that ventilation was someone else's problem. Early sections were built using cut and cover. Engineers dug a trench along the street, constructed the railway, and then covered it again. It was disruptive, and disruption was not shared equally. Construction demolished homes, including housing occupied by working-class Londoners. This is an important part of the story because transport infrastructure is never placed onto an empty map. It changes land, neighbourhoods, and the lives of people already there. The railway was nevertheless heavily used. By the mid-1870s, London's underground lines were carrying around 60 million passenger journeys a year. Later deep-level tunnels allowed lines to pass underneath buildings with less destruction at the surface, and electric traction made underground rail far more practical than steam. The expanding network changed the shape of London. People could travel further between home and work, new suburbs could develop around stations, and the usable city became larger. This is one of mass transit's greatest powers. It does not simply respond to a city. It helps create the city that follows. Now, once a city decides that a corridor needs better public transport, the conversation often becomes bus or rail. That sounds tidy, but it hides most of the useful questions. How many people need to travel? How far? How concentrated are their destinations? Is there space for dedicated lanes or tracks? Does the service need to turn off the main corridor and reach several neighbourhoods? How much can be built and how quickly? Rail can move very large numbers of people efficiently along busy corridors. A metro can avoid road traffic entirely. Trams can offer high capacity and a clear permanent route that may encourage development around it. Buses are more flexible. They can use the existing road network, branch into different areas and be introduced without building a railway from scratch. But a bus caught in ordinary traffic inherits the unreliability of that traffic. This is where bus rapid transit, or BRT, comes in. Proper BRT is not simply a normal bus with an optimistic name. It combines buses with features that protect speed and reliability, physically separated lanes, stations designed for quick boarding, payment before passengers enter, level access between platform and vehicle, and priority traffic signals. The aim is to give a bus corridor some of the operating discipline people associate with rail. Systems such as Bogota's Transmiliano have shown how much passenger demand buses can handle when the whole corridor is designed around them. That does not make BRT a universal replacement for rail. At the busiest levels, rail can provide more capacity. Rail vehicles can also have long service lives, and a fixed route can give passengers and developers confidence that the service will remain. BRT can usually be built more quickly and at a lower initial cost, but it still needs road space, stations, vehicles, staff, and serious enforcement of its lanes. Paint alone is not infrastructure. The best mode is the one that fits the corridor and connects it properly with the rest of the network. Sometimes that is heavy rail, sometimes it's a tram, sometimes it's an frequent ordinary bus whose greatest technological breakthrough is being allowed to arrive on time. Transport discussions are full of speed, capacity, and journey time figures. Those are useful, but they're not the final product. The product is access. A journey matters because of what is at the other end. a job, a school, a hospital, a shop, a friend, a theatre, a park, or the increasingly desperate hope of finding a public toilet. Good mass transit expands the number of those opportunities a person can reach within a reasonable amount of time and money. That can be especially important for people who cannot drive, cannot afford a car, or are too young to drive, or no longer wish to drive, or live somewhere where owning one isn't practical. It also uses scarce urban space more efficiently. A city centre street has a fixed width. It can carry a stream of individual vehicles, or it can dedicate some of that space to vehicles carrying dozens or hundreds of passengers all at once. That does not mean a new railway automatically eliminates congestion. Roads can fill again. Travel patterns can change, and poor connections can leave people with little reason to switch. Transit is the most powerful when it is paired with land that place homes, jobs, and services within reach, and with streets that make walking and cycling safe. There's an energy argument as well. In its 2019 report, The Future of Rail, the International Energy Agency noted that rail carried about 8% of the world's passengers and 7% of freight, while accounting for only 2% of transport energy demand. That comparison does not guarantee that every train is greener than every alternative. Occupancy matters. The electricity supply matters. Building infrastructure has an environmental cost. But it shows the advantage of moving many people or large quantities of freight together, particularly on a well-used electric network. The wider climate approach is sometimes summarised as avoid, shift, improve. Avoid journeys that do not need to be made through thoughtful planning and digital access. Shift necessary journeys towards walking, cycling, and efficient shared transport. Improve the vehicles and energy systems that remain. Mass transit sits mainly in that shift part, but it depends on the other two. A city cannot electrify its way out of every badly planned journey. You can build an excellent station and still surround it with a miserable journey. Perhaps the entrance opens onto a 6-lane road. Perhaps the pavement is too narrow. Perhaps crossing the street requires the patience of a saint and the acceleration of an Olympic sprinter. This is why pedestrianised areas belong in the conversation about mass transit. Most journeys begin and end on foot, even if the walk is only from a car park, taxi, or bicycle stand to the platform. Pedestrianisation can mean fully removing through traffic from a street, limiting vehicles to certain hours, or allowing access for residents, deliveries, emergency services, and people with disabilities under specific rules. The details matter. Done well, it can create safer, quieter, more pleasant public spaces. It can make shops and services easier to reach on foot and make the area around the station feel like a destination rather than an obstacle course. But traffic does not disappear merely because a sign tells it to leave one street. Some journeys change mode or route, some are no longer made, others move onto surrounding roads. The Strand Aldwych pedestrianisation project in central London gives us a useful example of why evaluation has to look beyond the attractive new paving. Researchers monitoring the area found a significant reduction in nitrogen oxides and environmental noise on the Strand after the changes. Fine particulate matter, known as PM 2.5, decreased on the Strand, but increased on Aldwych and some surrounding streets relative to the background conditions. PM 2.5 means particles with an aerodynamic diameter of 2.5 micrometers or less. They're the smaller portion of the broader PM10 category, which includes particles up to 10 micrometers. The researchers also found that PM 2.5 was strongly influenced by wider background pollution and weather, while nitrogen oxides and noise were clearer indicators of local traffic changes. The simple lesson is not that pedestrianisation works or does not work. It's that changing one street changes a system. Measure the pedestrian area, the boundary roads, how people travel, and who can still reach the area, and what happens over time. Otherwise, it's possible to create a lovely square and a lorry convention just around the corner. Pedestrianisation changes who can use a street. Low emission zones change which vehicles can enter an area freely, usually according to how much pollution their engines are expected to produce. Congestion charging tackles a different problem. It charges for driving within a busy area in order to manage the amount of traffic. London provides a very clear distinction because its congestion charge and ultra low emission zone are separate schemes. Depending on the vehicle, a driver may have to pay one, both, or neither. The important difference is the target. The emission zone is mainly trying to clean the vehicle fleet. A congestion charge is mainly trying to reduce or manage traffic. A road full of cleaner cars has cleaner exhaust than the same road full of dirtier cars, but it's still full of cars. It can still be noisy, crowded, and difficult to cross. It still uses the same amount of road space, and that does not make emission zones pointless. Reducing exposure to traffic pollution can produce real health benefits, and charging can accelerate the replacement of the most polluting vehicles. But this is an area where the strength in evidence needs careful wording. A 2023 systematic review in the Lancet Public Health found evidence suggesting that low emission and congestion charging zones can benefit some health outcomes. It also found that the number and quality of long-term health effects were limited and results varied between schemes. In other words, promising, worth taking seriously, and still being studied. Official scheme reports can add useful detail, but some results compare observed pollution with a model of what researchers think would have happened without the scheme. That's a valid form of evaluation, it just needs to be described as a modelled comparison rather than pretending that two identical Londons were available for an experiment. And then there's also the fairness question. The cost of replacing a vehicle is not equally manageable for everybody. Charges can affect low-income households, disabled people, small businesses, and workers travelling at times or through places where public transport is weak. Exemptions, grants, and scrappage schemes can help, but the most important support is often a credible alternative journey. Restrictions are easier to justify, easier for people to follow when buses, trains are frequent, affordable, and accessible. That's why the policy should not be treated as isolated switches. The low emission zone, the bus lane, the pavement, the fare, and the timetable all meet the same person's decision about how to travel. If the ingredients are so well known, why is every city not already running a flawless network? Well, the short answer is that mass transit is expensive, physical, and political. Building a line can require tunnels, bridges, utilities to be moved, land to be purchased, and years of construction before a passenger takes that first trip. Then the system has to operate every day. Drivers, station staff, controllers, cleaners, and engineers have to be paid. Vehicles and tracks wear out, lifts break, signals fail. A tree finds that one precise angle at which it can inconvenience several thousand commuters. Capital funding builds the impressive object. Operating funding makes the impressive object arrive again tomorrow. That distinction is easy to miss because maintenance is most successful when nobody notices it. Transit also has to balance different goals. A route designed for maximum speed may skip the stops needed by people with limited mobility. A network focused on only the busiest commuting hours may fail shift workers, carers, or people travelling for education or healthcare. Low fares improve access, but the lost revenue must be replaced. Very high fares can push passengers away but undermine the public value of the service. Reliability can create a vicious or virtuous circle. If service becomes infrequent and unreliable, passengers find alternatives where they can. Lower use can then be used to justify further cuts, making the service even less useful. Frequent, trustworthy service can do the reverse. More useful service attracts more passengers, which strengthens the case for investment. The pandemic also changed travel patterns. In many places, traditional 5-day commuting is not returned in exactly the same form, while journeys at other times and for other purposes still matter. A resilient network has to adapt rather than waiting for an old timetable to become true again. Then there's the allocation of street space. A bus lane, a cycle lane, wider pavement, or a tram line usually uses space that somebody already values for driving or parking, even when the overall system can move more people, the local change is visible and the benefits may arrive later. That makes transport planning a debate about priorities, disguised as a debate about paint. Improving the vehicle is the final part of avoid, shift, improve. For railways, network electrification normally means supplying electricity from fixed infrastructure along the route. That might be overhead wires or an electrified rail beside the track. The train collects power as it moves instead of carrying enough fuel for the whole journey. This can remove diesel exhaust fumes from the point of use, reduce noise, and provide the power needed for intensive high-speed or heavy services. It also requires substations, cables, clearances, bridge alterations, and a reliable grid connection. Electrification is a network project, not an unusually long extension lead. As of the 31st of March 2025, 39% of Great Britain's railway route length was electrified, according to the Department for Transport. That leaves a large non-electrified network, but it does not follow that every remaining kilometre must use exactly the same solution. Network Rail's traction decarbonisation work compares three broad options: fixed electrification, batteries, and hydrogen. Busy main lines, high-speed routes, and heavy freight demand create a great deal of sustained power, which makes fixed electrification particularly valuable. Batteries may suit shorter non-electrified sections or lower-use routes. Train can charge while running under wires and use the battery to bridge a gap. Hydrogen fuel cells create electricity on board. Hydrogen is therefore an alternative form of traction, not another name for electrifying the track. It requires its own production, storage, and fueling system, but is less energy efficient than using electricity directly. Buses face a similar route-by-route question. Many electric buses charge at a depot overnight. Others receive rapid opportunity charging at the end of a route or at selected stops, sometimes through a pantograph that lowers onto the roof. Trolley buses take electricity from overhead wires while travelling. They've existed for more than a century, which is a useful reminder that not every transport technology becomes more futuristic when an app is added. Battery buses offer flexibility away from wires, but routes, hills, heating, air conditioning, and time between services affect the battery capacity and the charging system required. Electrification removes tailpipe emissions from an electric vehicle, but zero tailpipe is not the same as zero impact. Electricity has to be generated. Batteries and infrastructure have to be manufactured. Steel, concrete, and copper all carry environmental costs. Those impacts can be reduced as electricity becomes cleaner and materials are reused, but they should not be waved away. Most importantly, a clean vehicle still needs to provide a useful service. An electric bus that comes once an hour is cleaner than a diesel bus that comes once an hour. It is not more frequent. Decarbonisation and service quality are different jobs, and a good network has to do both. The future of mass transit is often illustrated with a single spectacular object: a driverless train, a magnetic levitation line, a pod suspended from something that looks reassuringly expensive. Some new technologies will be useful. But the more important future may look less dramatic. One payment system, a bus that connects with the train, a working lift, a safe crossing, a protected lane, and enough service that nobody needs to check a timetable before leaving home. Digital information can make a complicated network easier to understand. Contactless payment can remove the need to learn different tickets for every operator. Demand responsive services can connect areas where a fixed high frequency route would be wasteful. None of those should become an excuse to exclude people who do not own a smartphone, have a bank card, or find digital systems accessible. Land use matters as much as technology. Homes built near frequent transport give more people a genuine choice. Shops, schools, and healthcare placed within walking distance reduce the number of long journeys the network has to solve. The best system will not force every trip onto mass transit. It will make walking the obvious choice for a short journey, cycling a safe choice where practical, shared transport a dependable choice for longer journeys, and cars available for trips and people who genuinely need them. That's what integration means. not one mode defeating the others, but each doing the work it's best suited to. Mass transit begins with vehicles, but it only works as a network. Capacity determines how many people can move. Frequency and reliability determine whether they can depend on it. Connections turn individual routes into a useful whole. Access determines who receives the benefit. And the energy system determines how cleanly that service can operate. The first underground railway showed that transport could reshape a city, while also showing that infrastructure has costs, and those costs are not always shared fairly. Buses, trams, and railways offered different combinations of capacity, flexibility, speed, and expense. Pedestrianised streets decide whether the final part of the journey is welcoming. Low emission zones clean the fleet, while congestion charging addresses how much traffic is present. Electrification reduces dependence on diesel, but does not replace the need for frequent, reliable service. The lesson running through all of them is there's no magic vehicle. A city moves well when its streets, services, stations, and policies support one another. But next time, we're going from the networks that move a city to one of the technologies that can help power it as we explore nuclear energy. And it should be a positively radiant episode. As always, I've been your host, Jack, and until next time, keep questioning and exploring.